Good morning. I'm going to welcome everyone to their seats. We're going to go ahead and get started here in a few moments. I want to thank everyone who's come in today. I know traffic was pretty crazy out there Monday morning. My name is Selena Dugas, and I am the Director of Veteran Services, so I want to thank you this morning for joining us. We're going to start with the presentation of colors.
You see, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, oh.
Thank you. That was our University of Houston ROTC members. I want to welcome Stephen Cottingham, the Director of Students at the United Campus Ministry of Greater Houston, for our invocation.
Please bow your heads. Let us come before God in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you today to commemorate a most formative tragedy of our generation. We ask that you make yourself known here today. We pray for our panelists, that they may be attentive to your spirit as they share their experiences. We pray for all those in attendance, that they may be informed and moved. Bless this time, that it may bring us together in a way that we may be worthy to be called your children. In your precious name we pray. Amen.
I want to welcome to the stage Dr. Richard Walker, Vance Chancellor for Student Affairs and Enrollment Services. Y'all may have a seat.
Good morning. It is my privilege on behalf of the university to thank everyone for coming out today. I remember very clearly in 2001 where I was. I wasn't in Houston. I was actually in Miami, Florida, at another university, at the University of Miami, in a staff meeting when the tragedy occurred. So for me, I was on a college campus working with students when this happened. And so to watch what all of our students were going through and what they were thinking about and helping them process it was something I will never forget. And so as we think about September the 11th, 2001, it's definitely a day worth remembering. Thousands of Americans died in a terrorist attack on our nation. And it's a day to honor their lives. It's also a day to show that we will never forget that horrific event that occurred on that day. And when you think about 9/11, there are a lot of folks who expressed their views and their thoughts at the time that it occurred through words and some through poems. And I have run across this poem that I think summarizes it well. It was written by a young woman named Hannah Schuhart, who at the time was a 7th grader. So let's think about that. If she was in the 7th grade in 2001, how old would she be today? But this was the thoughts from then a very young woman, and she entitled it, "We're Still Standing." Those twin towers, standing tall with pride, fell with grieving hearts, stunned, America cried. But we're still standing. Bin Laden tried to crush our land, but we stood our ground with our flag in hand, and we're still standing. Red for valor and the blood that fell, white for purity, our heroes tell, blue for the justice that will be done, proving once more these colors don't run, and we're still standing. I want to thank our guests who are going to serve on the panel today to also help us think about September the 11th, 2001, and really truly what it has meant for this nation and our country and our people. And it's important that we did this every year since I've been at the university, where we take time to think about one of the most devastating tragedies in our country's history. And so I thank our guests for being with us today, who are serving on the panel, as well as all the students and faculty and staff who joined us. Thank you.
We're going to have our introduction of our keynote speaker, Mr. Juan Lopez, U.S. Marine Corps veteran. He's an officer also in the Student Veterans of America.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Selena mentioned, my name is Juan Lopez, and I have the distinct pleasure of introducing a fellow brother in arms. But before we get there, quick synopsis of his illustrious military career. Lieutenant General Stephen A. Hummer was born on 1st July 1952 in Pennsylvania as the son of a U.S. Marine veteran. Lieutenant General Hummer retired from the United States Marine Corps himself on 1st August 2015 after 41 years of active service. After enlisting in the Marine Corps in 1970 and an honorable discharge as a sergeant in 1973, Lieutenant General Hummer was commissioned following graduation from Albright College, Pennsylvania, and in 1977 with a Bachelor of Science degree in psychobiology. His assignments in the operating forces included Rifle Platoon Commander, Company Commander, Battalion Commander, and Regimental Commander within 1st Marine Divisions, Chief of Staff, Joint Operations Command, Director of Operations, U.S. Forces Iraq, and Deputy to the Commander of Military Operations, U.S. Africa Command. Lieutenant General Hummer participated in combat operations in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. Supporting establishment duties included Ceremonial Company Commander, Marine Barracks, Washington, D.C., ERA, Commanding General Marine Corps Base, Hawaii, Deputy Commander, Marine Forces Pacific, Chief of Staff, U.S. Special Operations Command, and Commander, Marine Corps Forces Reserve and Marine Corps Forces North. Lieutenant General Hummer is a graduate of several schools within the Marine Corps University and earned a master's degree in international security studies from the Air War College. His decorations include Distinguished Service Medal, Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit with Combat V, Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal, Good Conduct Medal, and other personal awards and decorations. Lieutenant General Hummer currently serves as a senior mentor to the United States Marine Corps and a senior fellow to National Defense University, providing guidance, training, and education. Lieutenant General Hummer and his wife Sherry reside in The Woodlands, Texas. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Lieutenant General Stephen A. Hummer.
These things are working really well this morning. Good morning. Thanks everybody for being here. It's an honor. I'd like to thank the University of Houston for this invite, the student veterans of America, Lauren Bradbury for putting all this together. I know she was working very hard and had to be swivel-hipped here at the end to pull everything together, so that was great. Selena, thanks for doing this. I know you've done it several, if not many years. And Stephen, thank you for the invocation. That's what it's all about. That's why we're here, to remember, and certainly it's important. And Dr. Walker, thank you for your comments and your support also. And the Color Guard ROTC, they looked great, very, very sharp. It's always great to see our young folks in uniform. And Juan, thanks for the kind introduction. And to the fellow panelists, thanks for being here. Appreciate you taking the time to do this. I think it's important in remembrance. A lot of times I start, my wife and I are relatively new to Texas. She's from Wisconsin, I'm from Pennsylvania, and our first criteria for a retirement location was no snow. The next criteria was a good conservative state, no state taxes, and we actually, when we came down here, we went to San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and Houston, more specifically the Woodlands, and to determine exactly where in Texas we were going to end up. Well, we decided on the Woodlands in Houston, and as we meet new people, as we do new things, we constantly look at each other and go, what a great decision. We love the people, and as they say, we got here as soon as we could. My last duty station was in Stuttgart, Germany, as a deputy for Africa Command, so it's a little tough to do house hunting from Europe. So we're great. We're glad to be here. We love the location. We really love the people. We love Texas barbecue and we love kolaches. So I'm going to speak a little bit, not too long, but then we're going to go into a panel. And the purpose of the panel, of course, is group participation. It's not just for the people in the panel to talk, but it's also for the people in the audience to ask questions. So as I'm going through my spiel, you may be thinking, reflect back on what you know, or perhaps what you don't know, more importantly, what you don't know about 9/11. And you may want to think of a question to ask the various panelists once we get up here. So where are my veterans? Okay, we got a predominance of veterans. Thanks for preserving our freedoms. And I want to reflect on our veterans for a little bit. There's a kind of little saying I'd like to present, which was written by Charles Michael Province. He was a soldier, since Marines don't do the poetry thing as much. But he so eloquently stated, it's the veteran, not the preacher, who has given us the freedom of religion. It's the veteran, not the reporter, that's given us the freedom of the press. It's the veteran, not the poet, that's given us the freedom of speech. It's the veteran, not the campus organizer, who has given us the freedom of assembly. It's the veteran, not the lawyer, who has given us the right to a fair trial. It's the veteran, not the politician, that's given us the right to vote. And it's the veteran who makes America great, and the American people are fortunate to benefit from your services and sacrifice. As well, our thoughts and prayers go out to those military who have given the ultimate sacrifice in preserving our freedoms, and to their families. And I want to thank you again, our veterans, for preserving our freedoms. And to those who have not had the opportunity to serve, it takes an entire country. As we know, only 1% of the population of America actually serves in the military. So it takes that other 99% to keep us going, whether it's just morale, whether it's sustenance, or just knowing that the rest of the country is behind the military and what they're doing. And you as a military and many others have been around countries and they've seen where freedoms are lacking, and they certainly don't have the freedoms that we have. And we should never be complacent or take those freedoms for granted. And there's no organization that I can think of that has bled, sweat, or wept tears, or given the ultimate sacrifice as those who have been in uniform for our great country. And as also I start, certainly our thoughts and prayers go out to the victims of Hurricane Harvey and now Hurricane Irma. For those that have died, casualties, their families, their friends, and just all the challenges that they have. But I'd also like to thank our first responders, our police, our fire, EMT, hospitals. We've just seen all this come together. Our volunteer rescuers, that's just been absolutely wonderful. Overall, the churches, various relief organizations, veteran service organizations, all the donors, and support from the politicians. The president was down here twice, the vice president was down here, the governor, I think, was all over this, and the mayor, I think, did a superb job. So that's great. As well, I saw in the newspaper, University of Houston Student Veterans of America chapter was out there mucking houses and helping rescue folks. So that's wonderful, and it's great to see that. In 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service in a surprise military strike, killing almost 2,500 and sinking a large number of combatant ships and destroying almost 200 aircraft. Ask any American, and they will be able to tell you where they were on Pearl Harbor and what they were doing, or certainly of that generation. My mother-in-law, who's currently in Wisconsin, at that time was listening to a Green Bay Packers football game on the radio when the announcement came crackling over that home radio. Of course, if you study history, you'll remember we didn't have TVs back then, we didn't have email, we didn't have text, and we didn't have Twitter. So that's the best they could do was radios. The next day, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, came across the airwaves with his famous infamy speech. You should Google that speech. It's worth reading, especially in the aftermath of 9/11. That was my parents' Pearl Harbor, and 9/11 is ours. America is unique in what it stands for. It's a nation that was founded around an idea, not an ethnic background or a language or a kingdom. That concept is freedom and liberty for the individual. We were not established through a national identity developed over centuries. and anyone can be an American. We are the only country in the world whose Constitution has stood intact for this long. Study America. Study all the great things that America has done for the world in the realms of security. Certainly we were involved in World War I and World War II. We were pulled into those conflicts. We initially didn't want to get involved. We rebuilt Germany. We rebuilt Japan. We blunted communism in Korea and Vietnam. Also, in the realms of inventions, you know the United States has more patents than any other country in the world. Science and technology, we're leaders in medicine, and our contributions go the whole way around the world, as well as law. Any law students here? One of the best exports of the United States is law and the rule of law. Literature, the arts, music, IT, cyber technologies, you name it. Travel the world, and you can see and hear America. We fund the predominance of the UN. We fund most of NATO. Our foreign support outshines other nations. And if you want to talk about donations, the American people are at the top of the list, with given donations not only in the United States, but to folks around the world. On one hand, I'd say that America has done more for the world than the world has done for America. But then I'd have to admit that we're a country of immigrants, come from all around the world, and brought our cultures and our ideas here to America to further and develop and even make greater contributions around the world. We're a country of ideas and beliefs. We're free to have them as long as we don't force them onto others. Excuse me, on a beautiful sunny day, on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001, the jihadists of Al-Qaeda managed to do something that neither Hitler nor Stalin had ever achieved. In less than 2 hours, they massacred almost 3,000 innocent men, women, and children on American soil, including members of our armed forces inside the Pentagon. Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor, is said to have bellowed to the American peoples, "We will bury you." But the Soviets never buried us. The new totalitarians, the Islamic terrorists of Al-Qaeda, succeeded in doing so in Washington, in New York, and in Pennsylvania. And so our world changed. The attack forever changed us and our world. It's a moment in history that will never be forgotten. It was more than just the trade towers. It was a multi-target, near-simultaneous operation conducted by 19 terrorists aboard those flights. This cross, I keep it on my desk. It's a piece of the trade towers. It's a reminder of many things. It's a reminder of the attack. It's a reminder of our resilience as a nation and how we came together. It's a reminder of who we are and what we stand for as a nation and what we do for the world. We are one nation under God. We are a client nation and must remember what we truly believe. It's in God we trust, and it's God who gives us that resilience. So today, 9/11 is declared Patriots' Day in remembrance for the tragic events of 9/11. Flags are to be flown at half-mast in honor of all those that are lost, and it's actually observed around the world. There are other countries that think so much of the United States of America that they observe 9/11 also. It's a day to show our patriotism to show our love and our support for our country. We are obliged to remember the loss, to remember those and their families, for which today is very painful. It was an attack on our country, on our people, our economic center, and one of our oldest cities. It was an attack on our freedoms, our liberties, and what we stand for as a nation. I'll close with a poem on thoughts on freedom. Freedom isn't free, but what's that mean to me? It means there's a cost. It means there's a loss. So in this country I can be. Freedom isn't free, they say. For it we struggle far and near. There are those would like to see it go, for of it there is fear. Freedom isn't free, you know. Believers we must be. It doesn't happen by itself. Daily buttress we must see. Freedom isn't free, I've heard. Unique in the world are we. They come from far and wide, part of our nation, pride to be. Freedom isn't free, we know. Complacent at afar could render freedoms null and void in risk of losing who we are. Freedom isn't free. I thank you for the kind invitation today. It's special to be a part of this ceremony and this remembrance. I look forward to the panel. I look forward to your questions. God bless you. God bless our great state of Texas. God bless this great country. God bless the American people. Semper Fidelis.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, thank you so much for your words, General Hummer. I'm now going to be introducing our panel to you this morning. As previously introduced, General Hummer will be our first panel member. Next, we have Adrian Garcia. Adrian Garcia is a native Houstonian and the proud son of immigrant parents and siblings. His career in public service began as a police officer with the Houston Police Department in 1980, and he retired in 2003. While serving at HPD, he worked in various divisions, including Patrol, Criminal Intelligence Division's Organized Crime Squad, where he handled complex investigations that had national and sometimes international implications. He also served in the Community Services Division, where he excelled in developing community engagement programs for HPD, and then was appointed as the director of the mayor's anti-gang office by Mayor Bob Lanier and Mayor Lee Brown. In 2003, he started his career as an elected official after being elected from a crowded field to serve on Houston City Council from 2004 to 2008. As the Houston City Council Chair of the Public Safety Committee, Adrian led in the development of the Police Department's Real-Time Crime Center that was critical in HPD's success in lowering the crime rate. In 2008, Adrian was elected as Harris County Sheriff, providing leadership for nearly 5,000 employees and nearly a $500 million budget. During his tenure, he saved the taxpayers over $200 million in operational costs while reducing jail population and lowering the crime rate, and added over 200 new deputies to the streets of Harris County. He also provided the vision and leadership for the construction of the Sheriff's Office Real-Time Crime Center, City-County Joint Processing Center, and the new Public Safety Complex that will include a new emergency dispatch center for the Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Garcia also created a new partnership with the Houston FBI office by assigning personnel to their counterterrorism unit. The personnel assigned had attended a year-long training at the National Counterterrorism Center. During his time in office, he received numerous awards and recognitions by many community and governmental agencies. In 2015, Adrian was a candidate for mayor of Houston in 2016. Adrian was appointed to the advisory board of the School of Public Administration of Texas Southern University and is currently the managing director of his own consulting company and president of Outreach Cultural Intelligence, LLC, and provides consultancy services to various businesses locally and nationally. He remains a resident of Houston's near Northside community where he and his wife raised their family. Our next panel member is Major James A. Horn. Major Jim Horn is an airborne infantry officer with over 16 years of service. He earned a bachelor's degree in economics from West Point and a master's degree in international relations from the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. He also served as a Naval Strategic Studies Fellow, developing concepts of warfare using the electromagnetic spectrum. Major Horn served on the front lines for the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003 and completed 5 additional deployments totaling over 36 months in Iraq, 9 months in Afghanistan, and 6 months in Qatar. He has trained with armies across the Middle East, the Baltic states, and Ukraine. His awards and decorations include 5 Bronze Star Medals, 3 Meritorious Service Medals, 2 Army Commendation Medals, Master-rated Parachutist, Ranger Qualified, the Combat Infantryman Badge, and the Expert Infantryman Badge. And finally, Staff Sergeant Kevin Mersney. Kevin Mersney was born on December 8, 1989 in Huntsville, Alabama. As the son of a career Army officer, Kevin spent his childhood exposed to military life. He graduated from Hargrave High School in Huffman, Texas in 2008. Inspired by his father's service in the terrorist attacks on September 11th, Kevin enlisted in the Army as a 13-mic, multiple-launch rocket system crew member. During his 7 years of service, he served with the 18th Fires Brigade at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and the 75th Field Artillery Brigade at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He deployed multiple times, including service in Afghanistan, Kuwait, and Iraq. He was promoted to Staff Sergeant in 2013 and served in a multitude of leadership roles. His decorations include Afghanistan Campaign Medal with Campaign Star, Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal, Army Commendation Medal, 3rd Award, Army Achievement Medal, 2nd Award, Meritorious Unit Commendation, Army Good Conduct Award, 2nd Award, Combat Action Badge, and other personal awards and decorations. After the completion of 2 enlistments, he chose to separate from the Army and pursue a Bachelor's of Science degree in Construction Management here at University of Houston. Since leaving the Army, he has made the Dean's List and been inducted in Sigma Lambda Chi, the National Construction Management Honor Society. He is currently an officer in Student Veterans of America and is a veteran peer counselor for the University of Houston Veterans Services Office. My name is Ashley Toka. I am a peer counselor here at University of Houston. I'm also an Army veteran, and so now we're welcome, everyone. We're going to get started on our questions for our panel members. My first question, as General Hummer said, 9/11 has become a day that everyone remembers where they are, where they were when it happened. Everyone remembers very vividly that day. So I'd like to ask each of you just to describe what that experience was like for you personally on the day that the attacks happened. General Hummer, if you would like to begin.
Test. Does that work? I use my outside voice. At that time, I was the commander for 7th Marines out at beautiful 29 Palms in the Mojave Desert. I'd gone out on a run that morning through the desert, as I would do a lot of days, and got cleaned up, headed into work, and as I was driving into the parking lot of the headquarters building, I heard on the radio that something had happened. I wasn't quite sure if I caught it exactly. But then I pulled into my parking space, and there was other Marines coming to work. Also, they jumped out of their vehicles, and they said something had happened also. So we went up into my office. I had a TV in the office, and turned that on, and then started figuring out what exactly was occurring. And with that, we saw the second airplane go into the towers. So right away, we got a hold of various people. We got a hold of the division headquarters to see what they were doing. My wife and I communicated. We talked about this, and we forget if I called her or she called me to make sure we were okay. But at that point, you didn't know what else was going to occur. And I'm not sure we didn't know about the Pentagon at that point. We didn't know about Pennsylvania. So as a commander on a base, we locked down everything. We got the word out to people, told them not to move. Of course, working with the base, they became more alert at the gate. They started searches, etc. We ended up putting people on key infrastructure points like our power plants, our water purification areas, things like that. So just didn't know if there was going to be another or more attacks. So we started just to kind of get in a defensive crouch, and then started communicating and collecting information as to what was going on. Certainly got a lot off of TV, but in fact, we didn't know if our nation was in a position of war or not, where within 24, 48 hours we were going to load up and head somewhere, because that's kind of what we do. But certainly this was the first time in our lives that we had seen this kind of attack on America.
Thank you, General Hummer. Mr. Garcia, you come from a law enforcement background. So what was your experience specifically, especially with regards to your time in law enforcement on that day?
Well, thank you very much. And again, Lauren, thank you for the invitation to participate with this distinguished group of leaders, and enjoyed your remarks, General. On 9/11, when the first plane hit, I'd seen the news that the first plane had hit. I was taking my daughter to school, so at that particular point, nobody really understood what was occurring. We hadn't heard about the second plane yet. We hadn't heard about the Pentagon being hit yet. And so I think at that particular point, we were all still under the assumption that it was just a terrible accident that had taken place. So I take my daughter to school and drop her off, and by the time I made it back, then the second plane, we had the news of the second plane hitting, and then we had more information. And my wife immediately begins to ask, what do we do? What's going on? And she immediately wanted to have our daughter next to her. So I had to go back to school, pick up our daughter, bring her back, and the principal was adamant about, what do you know that I don't know? And at that point, we really didn't know where to begin. I was on the phone talking with respective individuals within the police department and the administration, because I was a director of the anti-gang office at the time, so I was close to the mayor's office. And we immediately began to mobilize, not knowing what we were looking for, not understanding what the threat for Houston would look like. But immediately we began to understand that we need to make sure that the city knows that we're mobilizing, that we're taking this seriously. And so units started to take visible positions in areas of downtown Houston. We began to mobilize at the respective airports. And then we started to have conversations with our federal partners, the FBI in particular, trying to understand what Houston's threat was. And I was really just mobilizing to make our office, our operations available. I was the director of the city's anti-gang office until I had a phone call from a counterpart in the FBI who said, we need you to help us evaluate what may be threats within the gang population. And it took me a step back, because we had not really thought that could be a local threat to our city's homeland security. And so that was a particular conversation and thought process that we had to undertake. But at that point, we began to realize just how the magnitude of the potential targets that Houston had. The Port of Houston, our airports, our Ellington base, our water systems, our electrical systems. It was just incredible, just the magnitude of what we had to appreciate at that particular moment. And how we got through it, I really don't know, but we did. It was just speaks to the resiliency of this city and the fact that we're going to do whatever we can to stand operations up. But I tell you what, there are a lot of lessons learned that day, and those lessons have stayed with us today, and it's why, as it was mentioned in my introduction, when I joined City Council, one of the key things I think we all remember was how intelligence systems and information systems broke down during the early stages of 9/11, prior to 9/11, better yet. And so when I became a city council member, Mayor White appointed me as the chair of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Committee. And the most prevalent question that I was getting at the time was, Councilman, are we any safer today than we were before 9/11? Because of the fact that it was discussed so much, debated at every turn, how little the respective federal agencies and local partners talk to each other. And so one of the first things that I got, or that I did rather, was that I got everyone together. I got the FBI, DEA, Secret Service, got all of our local, federal, state, and partners together, and we got them all in City Hall. And we worked through a conversation, but at the end of the conversation, the thing that the public took away, which I thought was very impressive, was one, an appreciation for that conversation. Number two, was that they noticed that we were talking to each other by our first names. And so they really, really took comfort in the fact that we knew each other, and that we hoped that, and that they hoped that that conversation or that relationship meant that we were sharing information at a level that we didn't do at just 2 years prior. So it was a profound, profound experience, a lot of lessons learned, and we still should not relax on the fact that there's still lessons to be learned. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Very interesting. Major, what was your experience? There you go.
Is that on yet? There we go. All right. Well, first, I'd like to say thank you to the university and Dr. Walker for hosting this event and inviting me to be on the stage with these other distinguished guests. It's humbling. So September 11th, 2001, I was 22 years old, newly commissioned second lieutenant in the Army. I'd graduated West Point just a couple months prior, and I was in infantry officer basic school at Fort Benning, Georgia. And we had just completed our first overnight mission out in the woods, and I think we'd gone to sleep at about 8 a.m. And so, not unlike the interruption of the Green Bay Packers game, which I'm sure was troubling, we were not happy to be woken up about an hour and a half, 2 hours later, and told that we need to do a symbol around the hood of a Humvee to listen to a radio to find out what was going on in the world. We spent the next several hours out in the woods, really trapped out there, because we weren't allowed to come back on the base. And we stayed out there till late that afternoon. I think we didn't get back in to the main base till about 5 o'clock. And when we did, when we drove back in, we're young 20-year-olds, young officers just entering the military service at a time where China was the greatest threat to America, and that was a threat that we could contain, and so it really wasn't a concern. And when we drove back onto that base and we saw the armed guards, they used to walk around with their M16s, right? The MPs, and they didn't have magazines in, or if they did, they were empty. But now they had helmets on, And now they had bullets, and they put up concertina, the razor wire around the main headquarters buildings, and it was shocking. And every one of us on that bus knew that that America was going to war, and that we were going to play a big role in that. We didn't know what it was going to be. We didn't know what it was going to look like. Did not know Saddam Hussein's name or Al Qaeda or anything like that at that point, but we knew we were going to be involved. And needless to say, we took the training very seriously for the next few months, and that quickly, spun up as we went into Afghanistan and then on to Iraq.
Wow, that's amazing. So you were 22, pretty young, but Mr. Mersey, you were still in grade school. So what was but you were in a military family. So what was your experience like?
So yeah, I'd like to also thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad to be up here with much more qualified people than myself. But yes, I was asked to kind of talk about the childhood aspect. So I was 12 years old, and I'll also never forget, I was in 6th grade social study class. I hate social studies. And so, we were right at the age where they really didn't want you, per se, to know what was going on. So it was 6th grade social studies. It was like 9 o'clock in the morning when you started really realizing something was up. There was a mass exodus of people picking their kids up. My parents didn't play that. They weren't going to come get me out of school. So I remember there was like 3 people in my next class. It was a math class, and there was like 3 of us. And we were in Houston at the time. My dad was assigned to a reserve unit. But you're 12, so you're at the age where, you're like a detective. You start figuring stuff out. So pretty quickly you start figuring out what you think is going on or what you hear is going on. And my uncle was actually at the Pentagon at the time. He was stationed there. I'm in a very heavily military family. And one of the big things I'll always remember is I got home, and like I said, my dad was at a reserve unit at the time, and he was already gone. They had already kind of gathered up people for meetings and stuff. So he was at a different place, and I can just remember how different it seemed from that morning to that afternoon coming home, especially in a military household. It was already completely different. Just in 12 hours, we already knew what that meant. And my sister, who was 4 years older than me, I remember her crying that day. It was just a couple hours later talking about knowing that Dad was leaving. And so that's one thing I'll always remember, that's how quick that things kind of changed.
Thank you. So obviously this was a very profound event for everyone on stage today, but could you perhaps summarize or speak about how this event changed you overall, how you see this event having changed you as a person, as your career as well? General Hummer, would you like to?
It took us from interwar period, between wars, into a state of war. I think within 48 hours we found out Osama bin Laden had claimed responsibility. My background in growing up in the Marine Corps was Marine Corps Special Operations. So there was times where I was a instructor for close quarters battle, hostage recovery, ship takedown, gas and oil platform takedown, and of course the reason we're doing all this is because of terrorism. Back to my office when we turned on the TV, we all knew it was a terrorist attack. It was just something that we had trained for. Now, not to that level, not to the United States in that way. So that took us from kind of a training mentality and put us definitely in a wartime mentality. Later that afternoon, I was in discussions with Division, the next headquarters up, who, the two-star general that was in charge of the division at the time was a guy named Mattis. I don't know if you ever heard that. I don't know if you had ever heard that name. So then it was, okay, what's going on now? And then, of course, we knew Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan. We're in 29 Palms in the desert. So we started looking at the mountains. Were we going to start training in the mountains? And so just collecting. Now, how it affected me personally, well, we were attacked. And kind of as I said in our speech, the reason we were attacked was because of our freedoms, because of what we have that other people either don't like or don't want us to have. And that's where, we pull together. And as a nation, that's what we're based on, our freedoms. And so that's what we were all about. So it was, get engaged and figure out what's going on. It changed all of us. It changed who we were, what we were doing, what we were going to do, and then talk to our nation, but specifically talk to the people in the military. Their careers to date have been shaped by this, the number of deployments into Iraq and Afghanistan, the number of Bronze Stars, the number of personal decorations that folks have been merited through their deployments, the time away from their families. Some people tend to say, well, you guys in uniform like to go to war. We don't like leaving home. We don't like leaving our families. We don't like leaving our kids. And, until they start doing wars in the Bahamas or Hawaii or, places where it's nice to go, usually they don't send us to very nice places. But it did. It's changed us as a nation, and each individual, has their own ways that they've been changed.
Thank you, General. Would anyone else like to give a contribution to that answer?
I think on the eve of Hurricane Harvey and Irma, if you look around, you will notice that more of us have developed over the years a capacity of preparedness. Most people now own these self-powered radios. We think about having some degree of stock of non-perishable foods. We have developed our own defense systems. And one of the things that reminded me, and one of the reasons on 9/11 when I got that call about talking about, getting asked about to do an evaluation of our gang threat here locally, was because I had forgotten that in the 80s, when I was working in the Criminal Intelligence Division, I had written a paper trying to determine what was the threats as related to the narco-terrorism issues that Houston had to think about. And instinctively, I thought about the fact that, well, at that point, the war in Colombia was, the drug war in Colombia was at its peak, and the most prevalent thing happening in Colombia at that time was car bombings. And so my write-up was the fact that we had to think about how narcotic traffickers could be most prone to be extensions of terrorists and conducting paramilitary operations in a local community, and that car bombings was something that Houston hadn't experienced yet, and that we had to think about and figure out how to prepare our resources for that and train for that. And so I'd forgotten I had written that in the mid '80s, but that was one of the reasons why I got called up, because they said, hey, this paper has come up and you have some interesting points, so we need you to follow through on that. and think about it, since now you're the director of this particular area of operation. And so over the years, we have learned those lessons, we have adapted to those, we've improvised to those, and Hurricane Harvey is showing us that we are applying the things that we've learned. We are instinctively running to things that maybe years prior we would have run away from. But we are just coming together as a collective community, offering shelter, offering support to folks out there. But on a personal level, I don't travel anywhere abroad without doing some type of risk assessment of where I'm going. And then making a few phone calls to friends within the Bureau or other agencies saying, you know, my daughter's going, matter of fact, my daughter did her study abroad in Uganda and Rwanda. So I was having some conversations with one of those agencies that have 3 letters saying, how do I extract my daughter if I need to? But that is the post 9/11 mentality that I think that has, you don't think of it that way, but I think it is a byproduct of 9/11. And the fact that, you know, I have an air filter mask at home, I've got other equipment, I stay in touch with folks, I try to read up on things regularly, and it always brings me back to those particular issues. So I think that whether we want to admit it or not, or to think about it, it has changed us all very profoundly and on a personal level.
Thank you so much. Major, would you like to?
So 9/11 certainly was the single greatest event in my life, most impactful, and has changed everything since. There isn't one thing it changed or a list of things, it's everything. Coming into this service when I did in 2001, just months ahead of it, it's defined not just my career, but my family and personal life as well. Has just been consumed by our actions and reactions to the events those days. For me, I entered the Army in peacetime, and then it became wartime. I signed up for the reason that a lot of people signed up. It was free college. It was, hey, somebody's going to be proud of me, and I'm going to serve my country. But you have no concept of what serving your country is. You don't know, and then all of a sudden you're faced with the fact that you're about to find out real quick what that is, and you don't know what it looks like yet, but it's coming, and so it brought service. It made service real to me. It made the concept of service tangible, because it was me, and you feel surreal. And you get on that bus to go to the airport, to get on a military transport, to go overseas, and you're like, I'm that guy. In that first Super Bowl, I believe the Raiders won that year, 2002. I remember watching the Super Bowl in a tent in Kuwait right before the invasion, and the cameras were there looking at us, and it was just tremendously surreal. I could not believe it. I was that guy that you had seen on TV. And so to be in that position, to be that one is like, okay, this is what service is. And then to understand the sacrifice part of that as you return from deployments, and people, your social life and personal life is very different. You know, their lives continue to go, yours does not, and during all the deployments. And so the changes, you learn what service is, you develop an understanding of what the threats are, and hopefully many do. But for me, it's defined my personal life, family life, business, professional life, and everything.
Absolutely. Thank you all for answering my guided questions. At this time, I'm actually going to open it up to any audience questions. If you'd like to ask any questions of our panel members, you can line up in the middle of our seating area, and we will start taking questions.
Hello. I'm Jennifer Gonzalez, and I work for the Cougar, and I was just wanting to know if I could get all of y'all's names and credentials. Hello. Yes, can we start with you?
I can provide that for you. I'll get that for you, okay?
Good morning. My name is Leslie Wilson, and I'm with the Student Veterans Office. I'm doing my practicum here. I'm a graduate school student for the University of Houston Graduate College of Social Work, and my question is for you, Sheriff Garcia. I know that emergency management services and law enforcement on the local level go very much hand in hand. And I'm a native Houstonian, and I was in the medical center during the 9/11 attacks. And that is also, as time has gone on, since the attacks, been shown to be a very high-value target as well. And we were all told that we kind of needed to get out of that area very quickly. And so my question to you is really, how has the policy and the procedures and the protocols from the context of 9/11 changed as far as emergency management services and law enforcement on the local level for Houston, considering how much we have here at stake to lose in this wonderful city of Houston, Texas?
That is a very good question, and I'll tell you that at that time, right after 9/11, the risk factors for why a community could be prone to a terrorist attack had multiple, I think it was 18 to 21 threats, or risk factors, better yet. And Houston has them all and more. And at the top of the list, and you're absolutely right, is the Texas Medical Center and the Port of Houston. And the way that things have changed over the years is that years prior, emergency management was, for the most part, all weather related. And so now we are embedded with our emergency management operations. The DOC, as you have watched during Hurricane Harvey, has law enforcement personnel. We train together, we talk about it. One of the things that I did during my time as sheriff was that we did two fundamental things. And one was that beginning on January 1, we started to talk about June 1st in relation to weather. But we had never done actual exercises. And so we started taking our personnel and our partners up to Huntsville, to Sam Houston State, where they have a simulation center, and started trying to do as near real-time exercises as possible, because I just felt so strongly that we had talked about a lot of things. We had a lot of good plans up on the bookshelves, but that we had not trained on them. And then having the Mumbai attacks that had occurred just recently, it started making me think, and talking to my personnel, that at that time the sheriff's office, or rather the Houston region, had effectively one SWAT team. It was the Houston Police Department SWAT team. And when I started talking about standing up another SWAT team, everybody was like ridiculing, saying, why do you want to do that? You just want to have your own toys. But the reality of it is that the Mumbai attacks had taught us that it's almost like hurricanes. They're not going to come in ones. If not, it could be a multi-tiered attack, multi-dimensional, and so that we had to be prepared for that. And so that's what it's effectively taught us as it relates to the medical center and in our emergency management operations, is that the policy is now that we try to be as seamless and embedded with each other as much as possible, so that we can stand up operations quickly. We don't have to open up the yellow pages, for lack of better words, and try to figure out who to call, but rather we know each other, we know where to call, we know who's responsible, and we start to move those things forward. And then if I could, real quickly, as it relates to medical personnel, my SWAT team had, we've worked to train, rather, our medical partners who who are embedded with our SWAT team as tactical officers, because the other thing that we learned was that you make entry into a particular place, there may be so much gunfire occurring that you can't wait for it to be safe to try to save lives, but rather we had to insert our medical personnel in with the fire teams, and we had to train in that regard and be prepared for that. So it taught us a lot of lessons, some that we never want to think about, but I feel very strongly that we are much better. Now, are we perfect? Are we fully prepared? The answer is no. We still have to learn more.
Good morning, panels. My name is Marcus Bonner, and I'm a cadet with the University of Houston. And my question I want to pose to each and every one of you, with 9/11 being the Pearl Harbor of our generation, as you so put it, General, how important is it to have a standing Army and a defense with interagency coordination? Homeland Security was created after 9/11, but a standing Army and a defense that can prevent something like this from happening in our future. Because, we're still recovering from it. A lot of people had wounds, internal and externally. How can we prevent this from happening again? And I'm curious to hear you guys' opinion on that.
So I'll start. I think one of the biggest things that changed, and I didn't get an opportunity to answer Ashley's question, but being one of the younger people up here, a whole group of veterans who are volunteers during road time. I came in after 9/11. Majority of veterans here at this school came in after 9/11. And it's a whole different dynamic, a whole generation that volunteered during road time. And that still continues today. And I think it does highlight the need for not only a standing army, but a volunteer military, which we have. And one of the biggest changes that you've seen since I came in from 2009 to when I got out in 2016 is how integrated we've really became just as a military. Words like joint is a huge buzzword now, but it really is true. When I came in 2009, all I knew was Army people. That's all I saw, that's all I dealt with. And by the time I was a staff sergeant and a launcher, on my last deployment, the main guy I was talking to my main boss was an Air Force officer. We had a Navy guy who called for fire. Whenever there was a fire mission call out, it usually came from the Marines. And that's just kind of the military side of how joints and integrated we've truly became. And both the general and the major can speak a whole lot more on that, I'm sure. But that's one of the big things that I think developed, not necessarily from 9/11, but from the years of experience we've gotten since 9/11 with all the combat operations going on in multiple theaters.
And if I could add, I would, having had a pistol on my side almost all my life, I joined when I was 19, and then seeing how we have increased our assets and prepared our folks. We have a rifle strategy within the sheriff's office, where we have folks that are particularly trained with rifles in the event that we have to engage folks at a distance. We now have weapons of mass destruction, devices to protect our personnel. As I mentioned, we didn't have the counterterrorism capacity. We have it now. So I think in terms of the hard assets as relates to armed personnel, and then in Texas, we like our guns, and there's a lot of folks carrying them today that are civilians because of the concealed handgun license and open carry now. But I think that the one area that we have worked hard to extend ourselves, if you will, in a traditional defense strategy is relationships. Prior to 9/11, and actually, if you recall, the first attempt against the World Trade Centers in the 90s, in the mid 90s, is that it made us aware that there are terrorists, there's cells in our country, and someone knows that they may be there. There may be individuals, and since 9/11 has a Middle East connotation to it, you know, imams, if you will, that are spewing particular rhetoric that may be anti-American and harmful and encouraging to create harm against our country. It is the ongoing effort to build relationships with the diverse communities that we have in our around us. In Houston, a lot of people don't realize we are the third largest international core community behind New York and Los Angeles. We speak 200 languages and dialects almost every single day in this area. And the question is, if someone knows something that someone is trying to do that will bring harm to us, like they did in 9/11, and you know the lone wolves, as we call them, the guys who have shot up the nightclubs and other places. If someone knows of those individuals, are they willing to step forward and tell someone in uniform that their neighbor, their friend, their loved one may be involved in something that would, in all likelihood, cause the arrest and incarceration of that person? And so we have to build those relationships, and that's an ongoing process. And you know, it's one of the reasons why, as sheriff, one of the things I did was start up what we call the Incident Response Forum. And I built it specifically with the Muslim community. And anytime something happened abroad, around our region, across the country, I'd get on the phone, call all these respective community leaders, and ask them if there's anything I need to know. And the FBI would join me on those calls, the Secret Service, sometimes the CIA would join me on those calls, and we would just tell folks, look, we need to make sure that things are safe. Please feel strong enough to call us offline and tell us if there's anything that we need to be worried about. And so it's that relationship process that's part of our defense, and we need to look at it as our defense and continuously work to make sure that we're building those relationships so that folks are willing to tell us something that they may know about, but for whatever reason may not be willing to step forward. So we've tried to create technology, you know, anonymous apps that people can give us anonymous tips to provide that kind of information. We've tried. That's an ongoing process, but I think it's the community relationship that is an integral part of our defense.
Thank you.
This is a question. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. And as an Army officer and a veteran of Afghanistan, I'd like to make sure that y'all would pinpoint and also quantify that Afghanistan, between Afghanistan and Iraq, was that not the targeted area that we should have went for? And second part, how important is the standing status of having a volunteer as a draft standing military service? That's an important question.
I'll comment on this one. But before I do, these are my comments and do not represent the United States Army. So, because these are opinions. There's no one answer to the very complex questions that you answered. And it really correlates to what the cadet had asked as well, is, you know, why is the standing Army? And you mentioned why Afghanistan and why Iraq. So my opinion on those are that they had achieved what Stalin could not. They had achieved what so many great nations, massive powers, armies could not. And they had inflicted great harm to the United States on our soil. So just put that in perspective. We had raised multi-million man and women army in World War II to fight these wars overseas, and yet this terrorist group had achieved greater success on our soil. So it deserves our undivided attention, to say the least. It deserves a commitment of the nation. It deserves a commitment of the money and the funding to fight it. And it deserves a commitment of deployment of troops overseas to keep those attacks off our soil, to fight the fight on their soil, to bring the fight to them, so to speak. We've spent the majority of our time in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban, not Al-Qaeda. However, I can very easily in my mind, and I don't know if, and I can't put myself in your minds, but I can very easily in my mind correlate between a safe haven for Al-Qaeda is a Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, which then relates to the safety of my wife going to the grocery store or to the bank or anything else. And when I look at, and Iraq was very different. And we talk about the weapons of mass destruction. Well, Saddam Hussein did have many ties to terrorist organizations. How would we feel today if President Kim had ties to terrorist organizations after their successful use and detonation of the hydrogen bomb recently? If he had ties to terrorist organizations that could then put that on an airplane, that could then fly into New York City, we would need a standing army to immediately invade. And so I think that goes to answer your questions of why a standing army and why we went into those nations, because of the significance of the threat, real and present danger. And that would be how I believe we need to respond.
Thank you very much. That's what I want to hear.
Morning. To each of you, I was just hoping to hear your opinions. I want to share my hopes and fears with you. One of my hopes is that, as mentioned before, the American people will always come together. I believe you said, Mr. Garcia said, coming together as a collective community. Obviously, in times of tragedy, is one of my hopes that will always be the majority. But as each of you are skilled in defense and thinking about how to defend ourselves, we always know that we prepare for the worst. And you mentioned, Mr. Garcia, about apps for communication as far as the community, giving tips and stuff like that. I think that's great. But you also mentioned, and as each of you know, we're in a sense of we have a sense of hypervigilance, I think is the best way to term it. And one of my fears is that if we feed into fear in isolation, if we lose communication with each other, we would see a rise in more paramilitary operations in local communities. And I did some church service in Northern Ireland. If you're familiar with the Troubles and the reconciliation work that's going on there, I experienced firsthand living in the communities where there are paramilitary groups, displaying, blowing off steam, displaying whatever kind of muscle that they have with car bombs and things like that. So I hope in our lifetime, that never happens here on our soil, but I'm not ignorant of it either. And so I just want each of you to speak about your opinions and your hopes and your fears about the double-edged sword of communication as it is today. We've evolved since 2001 with communications technology, of course, and I want to just hear about the nimbleness of each of your institutions to be proactive and keep up with, are we creating communities that do want to come together for the common good, or are we creating fear and isolation?
Well, I'll just briefly say that when I took over the sheriff's office, having had the perspective of being a council member and seeing and coming across a lot of different sectors of the community and my experience with the police department prior, and when I stepped into the sheriff's office, there was community strife. There was a lot of tension. There had been some controversy. So my work was to bring folks together. And so one of the things that I charged the members of my office was that we sometimes tend to gravitate to what is most similar to us, most familiar with us, with each of us, and most comfortable to us. And so I would continuously ask my staff, go out and meet people you know nothing about. Build relationships across dimensions that you have never thought about doing. Be willing to ask the questions that you are very curious about, but not sure whether to ask them or not. And I think if we do that, we're going to, number one, find that we have more in common than we give ourselves credit for. And secondly, I think we're going to find those individuals who may feel isolated, not because they're bad people, but just because we tend to look at them differently, that we're going to realize that that's a brother, that's a sister, that's a friend, that's someone who has just as much at stake and wants nothing to happen to our respective communities. But we got to build those relationships and have that conversation so that we become much more stronger, much more defensible. Because if we keep ourselves in silos, then we'll give those who want to cause harm the opportunity to hide much easier.
First off, I think the question previously that the staff certainly answered on the jointness was dead on, and the interagency coordination and cooperation. So the communication aspect is obviously very important, but what do we get through that? We get the trust, so that we can trust each other, so that when on day-to-day activities we can trust people, but when bad things happen, one, we know who to call because there's networks that have been established that your organizations have established. They call, they know people, so when they pick up the phone or they're communicating with folks, they know and they've developed that relationship that then, that trust is either there or it follows. And that's the joint community, that's the interagency community, the international community. I mean, there's a lot of nations that trust and rely on the United States. There's a lot of nations that we rely on. So all that continued communication in the right form, in the right manner to bring folks together. And then when bad things happen, we see what happens. We see what happened after 9/11. We see what happens here after Harvey. We'll see it in Florida. This nation will spend a lot of time, resources, and people. I know for Harvey, a couple anecdotes. We met a husband and his wife, young folks, that jumped on an airplane and flew down here from Indiana. They just wanted to help. They got involved with one of veteran service organizations, and we had them mucking out houses. Another guy loaded up his pickup truck from Southern California and just drove here, not knowing where he was going, what he was going to do, but he figured he'd bump into somebody sooner or later that would head him in the right direction. So from the big picture to our nation being attacked down to individuals just wanting to help individuals, I think communications are incredibly valuable. They need to keep going, and it develops that trust and those relationships which we rely on.
Hi. So this is also in the context of future conflicts that America may be having, and my question is directed more at the service members on the panel. This is a little bit kind of a sensitive subject, and maybe you want to give your politically correct answer, maybe you'd rather give something else. But I'd like to know your opinions, I'm going to leave this open-ended, about women in combat MOSs and whether or not you think that strengthens the military we've got or whether it weakens it, and what that might mean for future conflicts.
So I actually had the first female artillery driver in the Army, was assigned to Launcher Alpha 32 Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Staff Sergeant Mearsney was given that gift. And I was actually really concerned about it. I'm going to be honest. I won't be politically correct. The artillery didn't know what to quite make of it, I don't think. And so I remember getting called into my first sergeant's office, and it was weird. The commander was there, the sergeant major was there, and they were like, Sergeant Mearsney, you're going to get a new driver. And I was thinking to myself, well, this is weird. I get a new driver every other week. I don't think Sergeant Major comes down usually to talk to me about it. And it was a female driver. Her name was Specialist Begley. And she was one of the better soldiers I've had. I deployed with her. I took her to Iraq. And there was challenges. You know, like anything you change, it's a growing experience. Anyone that's been in the military, especially the combat arms, knows that sometimes living conditions are tight. As an artilleryman, the three of you usually live out of a launcher for days on end. And so there was changes, there was things that you had to adapt to understand that you had a female in the crew now. There was a lot of good things too, though, I think, from time to time. She was the calmest driver I've ever had. And, so I think there was positives. And overall, after a couple weeks, a couple months, whatever you want to call it, it just became another driver. You know, it wasn't a female driver, it was a driver, Specialist Begley, just another soldier. And by the time I left, we had 4 or 5 female 13 Max. And so civilians that may not quite understand, like, this is a thing. It's not just something you hear on the news or like a dog and pony show. It's happening. We had more and more of them by the time I left. And I think overall, it's not necessarily a negative thing, but I caveat that with, we have to make sure we ensure standards. And I feel like at the moment we're doing that for the most part, at least in the artillery. We're slightly different than the infantry in other places. But as time goes on, you just have to make sure we continue to ensure the same standards that each job and each person has.
Okay. First, I guess there's a couple things I'll say. One, when the military becomes kind of a social petri dish for experimentation, that's very challenging, and it's for political reasons. It's not necessarily for our readiness. On the other hand, women have been in combat. Whether they were in all the combat MOSs or not, they have been in combat. When my regiment was one of the regiments that went into Iraq, got into Baghdad. Matter of fact, it was one of the battalions in our regiment that pulled the Saddam statue down. That day, really close to where the Saddam statue in the Palestine Hotel and Fudor Square was, we had a logistics column that was along the Tigris River. I was in the Palestine Hotel, we were doing some coordination, whatever, and we heard all this shooting going on. Came outside, wanted to figure out what was going on. That column had taken some fire from across the Tigris River, and that logistics column returned fire and actually took the fight to the folks. We had one female Marine on a Mark 19 that was just driving Mark 19 rounds into the building from which they were taking fire, and the fire, was suppressed almost immediately. But they performed admirably, and we know in Afghanistan, you have the women organizations that go in and work with the women Afghans because they won't talk to the males. So they've performed admirably, and in a lot of the MOSs, it'll work. The challenge is some of the very, very, very physical MOSs, like the infantry, like special operations, and we do have women in special operations, but it's just where we have them. But the services all have qualifications to do those jobs. And if they're up to those qualifications, then good on them to get in there. So now that all the services have that, whether it's artillery, infantry, special operations, I mean, there's females that are interested in getting into the SEALs. So there's a couple candidates out there. So we'll see how they do. It's just challenging because it's you know, you get into the physicalness of the whole thing. But just look at, I mean, all the athletics. You know, we're breaking records all the time, whether it's the 100-yard dash or pole vaulting or whatever. So the physicalness is of the females and the males is getting stronger and better all the time. And plus, women are some of the best marksmen in the world. I know the Marine Corps has got several females on our marksmanship teams. Their eye-hand coordination is very, very good. Thanks.
And I wasn't trying to make an excuse there. It really wasn't working. So, sensitive topic, obviously. My experience with working with foreign armies, specifically Slovenia, which was been integrated from the start. And actually, we went there to train in 2015, and their sergeant major of the Slovenian battalion that we were training with actually brought up the subject. He says, "What do you think? What are you going to do?" So we just discussed it for a moment, and he said, "Well, here's what I think." And something had caught his eye before he made that remark, and he called two soldiers over to the females, and he chewed them out. Bad. Sent them back on their way. He says, when you can treat them all the same, it'll work. Until you can't, it won't. That applies to physical standards, training standards, all the standards. So the devil's in the details. It's in the implementation. It's in, fairness across the board, treating everyone the same, which I think we all want. So set the standards where they need to be, hold everyone to those same standards, and I think it's possible.
Good morning. I want to thank everyone for attending the forum and for allowing me to ask this question. It's directed towards Councilman Garcia. Councilman Garcia, I've been sitting here listening very attentively in regards to the planification to the city of Houston regarding terrorist threats and sleeper cells. Just to give you a little background about myself, I'm originally where I'm originally from. I'm 40 minutes away from Boston, 2 hours away from New York. When the towers collapsed, my brother, he worked in the financial district. The building he worked from was 3 city blocks from the towers. He was trapped, and shortly thereafter, he couldn't leave because he was responsible for over 70 children. That weekend, the weekend of 9/11, I traveled down there. On my way down there, they were bringing the rubble of the towers. And I clearly remember, as if it was yesterday, the rancid smell that was emanating. I went, my brother was fine, the children were fine, me and him had a long discussion. Shortly thereafter, the city of New York, they changed everything. They put police officers on every city block, a city that has over 18 million people. Then the state where I'm from, the capital city, they did a hiring drive, nationwide hiring drive. They even reached out to the Marine Corps. They started recruiting Marines that were about to ETS, huge recruiting drive. They set up substations, and that wasn't enough. They even had the police officers go out and interact with the community. We're talking 4 different seasons, summer, winter, fall. They're out there on bicycles. They're out there walking in the snow, just like the local post office. Then the Boston bombing occurred. My brother, he and his family, they lived at the time a mile away from the Boston bombings. And my brother, he worked in the federal building. So I hear about all this planification and reaching out to certain organizations. I've been in Houston for a year, and I love this city. I actually starting to think that I'm a Houstonian now. I'm in speaking with my family, I'm telling me I'm a Houstonian now, I'm a Texan. And with that being said, my perception is totally different because I've been close to people that have actually been there and experienced it. And here, when I interact with the locals, one of the things I've noticed is there isn't as many I really don't see the interaction. I see local law enforcement, they drive. They drive when they have to respond, but I don't see them out there interacting with the local community or enough of them, especially for a city of 4 million people. And when I speak with the locals, I'm like, oh, they tell me, I'm like, why isn't there enough police officers? Or why they don't interact with the community? And their response is, oh, the city of Houston doesn't have the funding. I mean, that's the feedback I'm getting from the community. And my question, with all that being said, my question is there probably, maybe in the near future, are they considering doing a hiring drive and because I'll take, for example, back home, if you call 911, they're at your door within 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes. Here, you call 911, it's going to be a couple of hours. So I'm not here to change anything. The question is, with all this planning, like you stated, it takes a village. Well, an individual can't make it. You need the assistance of the community. But if you have certain organizations, that's not really getting the community involved. So is probably the city of Houston considering a hiring drive to increase their numbers so then the local law enforcement can interact with the community? Thank you.
Thank you, and it's a good question because you do need to have those individuals out there and engaging the public as much as possible. You know, there is a average number of officers per 1,000 residents that's looked at across the country. At one point, Houston had 3.3 officers per 1,000 residents. There's no real set formula for what it needs to be. It's just really what a respective community has to invest in its ability to hire personnel. Houston is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 2.5 officers, I think, right now, per 1,000 residents. And there is no doubt that if you were to ask the police chief today, how many more officers would you love to have? And he'll tell you he'd love to have a police department the size of NYPD, 40,000 officers. But it is a very, very tough balancing act in terms of what we have available to accomplish it. Because HPD's budget today is almost $1 billion. It's about 800 million, I think, what the current budget is. And so, and when we're reflecting on 9/11, it's easy to say that there's no amount of money that we should spare in investing towards our security. But the reality of it is that there's so many other competing interests that play into the success of this city as well. And so there are ongoing hiring efforts to increase the police force. Some of the challenges that the city has undertaken to try to deal with not having the financial resources to accomplish that, our pension systems and those issues that have been talked about here as of late. But at the end of the day, I don't think we will ever be able to see the size of a police force in one department in the city of Houston like we do in New York City. It's just because of different funding systems. It's just the way the different governments are set up and what resources the city of Houston has to hire particular officers. But going back to 9/11, one of the key things that we found how to create one department almost instantaneously is the fact that we learned in 9/11 of the challenges of radio inoperability. And so today, in fact, when I was in office, we had a shooting occur at Lone Star Community College. There were so many police officers from different agencies stepping over themselves, trying to respond. It was not the typical 911 call, as you alluded to, that you're waiting for your home agency to respond to. But when that happened at Lone Star Community College, we had DPS troopers, Texas Rangers, community college, school district, university police, TABC, Texas Alcohol and Beverage Commission agents. We had the FBI. Everybody was converging almost all at once, because one of the things that we have done, where we did make a significant investment in, is addressing our radio inoperability challenges. And so now, whenever there is distress to a particular magnitude, agencies from across jurisdictions, from other cities, from other municipalities, and here in the Harris County area, we have close to 100 different law enforcement agencies patrolling the region in some form or another, whether it's a school district, police officer, whether it's a university police officer, whether it's railroad police, whether it's the Metro Police, the Houston Police, constables, sheriffs, state agents, and the federal agencies. We have almost 100 different agencies here. But we can always do better. We want to do better. But at the end of the day, having sat in the seat where I was a sheriff and I only had if Houston proper had 2.5 officers per 1,000 residents, as the sheriff, I had 0.8 per 1,000 residents. And I wanted to change that number so badly. But I couldn't set my own budget, so I had to be strategic and innovative with the resources that I had. That was how I was able to hire 200 new deputies to put on the streets, because I do want them interacting with the people. I do want them having that relationship. I do want them to be seen out there. I would always say, I want the public to see my deputies when they don't need them. That's always the best time. But it takes financial resources, and that's always going to be a challenge for us.
All right, we're going to wrap this up. Thank you so much to our panelists. Once again, Ashley for moderating it. We are going to I have a couple of little gifts we're going to give, but we're going to have Dr. William Munson, our Dean of Students. He's going to come in here and give us our closing remarks, and we will wrap this up. Thank you.
Good morning, all. Thank you, panelists, for that great discussion this morning. I was totally on the edge of my seat. Love hearing all your personal experiences. I can think of back when 9/11, my day, that day was not all that dissimilar. Coming into work here at UH, not knowing exactly what you're getting into, then trying to get communication out to all the students who were a lot traumatized of what was going on, making sure that they were okay, and then going home at the end of the day, back to Kingwood, and not seeing any air traffic at all, which was very shocking. And it's the day really, lots of things changed around the nation. So again, thank you for those great comments. I also got the poem email, so keeping with that theme, I brought a poem in to share with everyone. This one is called Recessional, written by Rudyard Kipling in 1897. God of our fathers, known of old, Lord of our far-flung battle line, beneath whose awful hand we hold, dominion over palm and pine. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. The tumult and the shouting dies, the captains and the kings depart. Still stands thine ancient sacrifice, an humble and contrite heart. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. Far called, our navies melt away, on dune and headland sinks the fire. Lo, all our pomp of yesterday is one with Neviah and Tyre. Judge of the nations, spare us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. If drunk with sight of power we lose, wild tongues that have not thee in awe, such boastings as the Gentiles use, or lesser breeds without the law. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. For heathen heart that puts her trust in reeking tube and iron shard, all valiant dust that builds on dust, and guarding calls not thee to guard. For frantic boast and foolish word, thy mercy on thy people, Lord. So again, that's Recessional, written by Rudyard Kipling in 1897. It was written for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. Therein she was celebrating the 60th anniversary of her reign. The poem is well known for its biblical phrase, lest we forget. Repeated throughout the poem and quickly, it was repeated throughout the poem, and it's quickly become a mainstay of memorials and headstones. Kipling was troubled by his view of the world as a place of very fragile standing, and this view that made this poem very powerful in 1897 is still applicable today. As we close our remembrance today, the phrase, lest we forget, reminds us that it is fitting that every year on September 11, Americans join together to honor the memory of those 3,000 plus that died on that day. Further, today we recall what we learned about ourselves on September 11, 2001. We recall how we acted that day. We remember once again how ordinary human beings chose duty in the face of death as many first responders continued to help people out even as the buildings were collapsing around them. We saw ordinary people choose self-sacrifice for the good of strangers as the passengers on the plane over Pennsylvania refused to allow hijackers to succeed. And we remember the brave members of our U.S. Armed Forces who have sacrificed to who protect our country since that tragic day. Lest we forget. Thank you.
Again, we want to thank you for coming today. Those of you who, students, I mean, it really is important for you guys to be here, so I'm very thankful that you guys showed. I'm going to get Loren up here. We're going to give our we also invite you, we have some refreshments, so afterwards if you want to talk to some of our panelists, network, meet each other, we invite you to join us. Okay.